is director of the Wilson Center's South Asia Institute. You've tracked all of South Asia for a long time. You're seeing what's happening in Pakistan and writing about it. And now, just a day before the Indian Prime Minister goes to the UAE, getting the Indian Navymen back from Qatar, from your prism in Washington, D.C., what are you making of how India's position on the global high table seems to be rising fast?
Right. Well, going back, overall, to an expression you used before about India punching above its weight, for many years here in Washington and other Western capitals, one of the major criticisms of India's foreign policy is that it punches below its weight, that it talks a good game, has many ambitions, but we're not seeing it play out on the global stage. And I think that's a really vivid reflection of how things have changed. That indeed we have seen over the last decade India so much more present and involved and central to international relations than it had been in the decades prior to that. Not that it was insignificant in the decades prior to the last 10 years, but clearly its footprint has deepened. And I certainly would emphasize its engagement with the Middle East as a big reflection of that, as well as its recent engagements with its South Asian neighbors, excluding Pakistan. If you look at how it has been involved in these new initiatives under the DINSTEC rubric to develop cross-border connectivity projects, that's pretty significant. But I think that in engaging why we've seen this change, why we've seen this more active, engaged India on the global stage over the last decade, I think it goes hand in hand with India's economic growth story. This is one big reason why so much of the world is so keen to engage with India. It is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. So everyone wants to trade and engage commercially, but also more broadly with such a critical global economic player. And I think that also helps explain a point that you had made earlier about some of these countries in the Gulf and the Muslim world that might otherwise be concerned about some of the domestic politics playing out in India, including the Hindutva issue, but they want to engage with India commercially. They see it as a critical market, which it is. Now, all that said, I think that there still is work to be done. I think that when it comes to India's competition with China, that certainly is a challenge. Dealing with the border issue remains a challenge. And if you want to talk about India seeking to project itself as a voice of the global South and a bridge to the global South, that's something that China has been claiming to do as well. And I would argue that if you look at Latin America and Africa, China is much more present in those regions than India is, at least today. So clearly that's a challenge that India continues to face. But on the whole, absolutely, looking at over the last decade, significant changes in how India has been so much more entrenched with its deepening global footprint on the global stage.
Mohan Kumar, what do you think explains the successes of Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy with the Gulf Arab countries? We've had some successes with Africa, some also with Latin America, but just the extent of success, the unlikeliness of the success and the extent of the success, how do you explain it?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Having spent 4.5 years as India's ambassador to Bahrain and having looked at the Gulf Cooperation Council states, I have to give top-notch marks to the personal diplomacy of Prime Minister Modi. The only thing that works in the Gulf countries is personal diplomacy. Please bear in mind that Prime Minister this is his 7th visit to the United Arab Emirates. He has invested a lot of time and effort knowing these monarchs personally. And while everything else that your panelists are saying in terms of increased clout, in terms of the fact that these countries are investing in India, all of that is valid. I would say the most important factor is personal diplomacy. The personal diplomacy exercised by Prime Minister Modi has also led to a dehyphenation between India and Pakistan, something that we have not been able to accomplish in the past.
So what do you think he's doing which other Indian PMs weren't?
Well, to be absolutely honest, and I try to be apolitical about my foreign policy analysis. Prime Minister simply didn't go as often as he did. That's the difference. This Prime Minister never misses an opportunity to meet these sovereigns, especially UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar. Never. In the margins of COP28, he met them. Margins of UN General Assembly, if he goes, he meets them.
Why does he say the UAE is his second home?
The UAE is second home because he genuinely believes he has a good rapport with the UAE sovereign. And you must also appreciate that this coincides with the desire of these countries to have actually adopt the liberal mantleship. They want to be known as liberal monarchies. They don't want to be known as monarchies which are fundamentalist. So it's a happy coincidence from that point of view. But really, at least in so far as is the transformational diplomacy in the Gulf is concerned, you simply have to give full marks to the amount of time and effort that he has invested. You know as well as I do that in these countries there is only one person that matters, and that's the monarch. So the
Prime Minister Modi, in some of these images that we are playing out, Mohan Kumar goes out and hugs these kings. Now, I'm sure in their country nobody's going to dare hug these kings, right? How does that play out? Here is a democratically elected Prime Minister, far from being king, coming and hugging, like this traditional Indian jhappi, and they seem quite pleased with it. From at least from the images, from the body language, what we can make out, they seem quite okay with it.
I think it depends on how you do it, and I genuinely think the Prime Minister has managed to, really master this technique. It's really seen as a very, very warm gesture, because it could be seen as rude if a Christian or a Western leader were to do it. But coming from India, the Prime Minister is able to convey this message that, listen, this is how we treat each other in the Orient. So there is a bit of that as well. But I would really, you have to give full marks to the Prime Minister for having repeatedly made visits to those countries, trying to establish a personal rapport. That is the only thing that can get you a pardon from the Emir.
And also remember, personalized diplomacy doesn't work in a country like China. Prime Minister Modi tried it, didn't work. There are too many structures and wheels within wheels in China for that to work. But with the Gulf Arab countries, a personal touch to diplomacy most certainly seems to be working.